Kyle Bryan from Cruiser Customizing here with Charlie from Progressive Suspension, and today we're going to have a little seminar on motorcycle suspension products. Now Charlie, when it comes to suspension for motorcycles, it's really the only thing that really separates us and our motorcycles from the road and the gyrations that we feel there.
Right. You want to have the best suspension, obviously, get a comfortable ride, have a safe ride, good handling. You want the bike to be stable and to be controllable, and that's what suspension does. So good suspension is going to do all those things and really provide the best experience when you're riding your bike.
So one thing we hear a lot from our users is the question, I just bought a motorcycle, it already has suspension from the factory, why would I possibly need to upgrade it?
Well, it's important to realize that when the companies are designing the bikes, they have a budget. And suspensions are usually not a big part of that budget. For instance, Harley spends about $10 on their shock absorbers on their bagger bikes. So that kind of tells you what you're getting for your huge investment in that motorcycle. And the aftermarket can provide a much better product and give you a much better ride and control and all those things that go along with it.
So when we talk about a much better product, some of the things to take a look at are going to be the actual materials used for the shock, right? Yep. So some of the pieces here are billet aluminum that have been milled out. Right. Where a lot of the stock shocks are just going to be a stamped piece of metal with some valving on the inside. It's not really tuned for a really nice ride.
Correct.
What are some of the other things that we're going to find from a Progressive set of shocks that you're not going to find from, say, most of the OEMs?
Well, the Progressive shocks are all going to be, nitrogen charged shocks, coil over for the most part.
And that's going to be versus what?
Where you just have a chamber with the oil, depending on the suspension system. You could even have the oil and the air mixing, which is generally a very bad thing for suspension.
What are some of the other things we're going to see?
Valving is going to be tuned for the application. The springs are going to be correct for the application depending on rider weight. The OEMs are always going to have to try to compromise to cover a real wide spectrum of riders. So hopefully we're going to have a much better tuned solution for the riders.
You know, the Progressive suspension springs usually come in a standard and a heavy duty.
Correct.
Now the standard rated spring, what would you recommend the rider weight for that type of setup?
Well, our criteria for the heavy duty spring, let me approach it that way.
Sounds great.
Is about 250 pounds for the rider and or riding with a passenger more than half the time.
Okay.
So if you meet that criteria, and some people are kind of in that gray area, so they have to decide if they want to go with that heavy duty spring and have it be a little stiffer when they're riding by themselves, or have that extra suspension for when they have the load.
You load the bike up, you're ready to ride, right? You've got maybe 100 pounds of luggage, who knows what you got back there. You've got yourself, you're completely set to ride off for weeks on end.
Right.
Now when you get to where you're going, you unload your motorcycle, and now you've got just your person on your motorcycle. How do you appropriately set the suspension for those types of situations?
The first thing is that the sag adjustment is critical on the shocks and for the forks too. If that's set correctly, you're going to have the best ride for the load that you have on the bike.
Okay. For those who aren't familiar, what is sag?
Sag is the measurement that we use between the bike unloaded and the bike with the load on there. And basically what it does is sets the preload on the shock, so the shock's in the position to give you the best ride overall. You measure the eye-to-eye measurement on the shock.
So while the bike's sitting upright, we're going to measure from this point to this point?
Correct.
Okay.
Right, and then you're going to put the load on there, whether it's a solo rider, rider and passenger, whatever it is, and measure that again.
Okay.
The difference between those two measurements should be about 3/4 of an inch to 1 1/4 inches.
Okay.
So that's the easiest way to do it, and once you have that setting, say for a solo rider, then it's relatively easy to ramp up the preload for extra weight of a passenger or luggage, that type of thing.
How would you then adjust that shock in order to get the perfect setting?
Well, it depends on the shock. The 412 that you're holding right there has a ramp style adjuster, and you use a spanner wrench to adjust it. There's 5 preset notches there.
Okay.
So they come, all the shocks from Progressive come set on the softest setting.
Okay.
So as you go up this ramp, then the shock's going to be progressively stiffer. The other shocks that we have here, the 430, 444, 944, all have threaded collars. So this collar turns, and that's how you adjust the preload. And the nice thing about this is you don't need a tool, and you can have a much finer adjustment of the preload.
So that goes for the rear of the motorcycle. What would you do for the front?
The front, we actually have a couple of different things that you can do. Changing the springs out is one way to do it. For most applications, we're going to have a standard spring and a heavy duty spring. Again, depending on the rider weight, that could improve your suspension quite a bit right there. The other thing that you can do is, for a lot of applications, we have the monotube. This is basically a self-contained suspension system. You've got a gas charge damper up here on the top, and then a progressive rate spring here on the bottom. So in most cases, it's going to eliminate a lot of brake dive. It's going to give you a much better ride, a much more planted feel going around turns, and a lot more stability in the bike.
So now that we learned a little bit about motorcycle suspension, what are some of the key characteristics that a rider's going to notice after they put a set of progressive springs and shocks on the motorcycle?
The biggest improvement is going to be the ride. That's what most people are going to associate, especially on a cruiser. They're going to have a lot less bottoming, a lot less jarring going over bumps, and the bike is going to feel a lot more stable. You're going to eliminate the brake dive, which is a big complaint with cruisers because the suspension is normally tuned very soft. So those are the things that that you'll find when you change the suspension.
So if your current ride is giving you a little bit of pain in the back when you're riding down the road, if you're getting jarred when going over potholes, if you feel the front end dive excessively, all of those symptoms can be fixed by putting a set of progressive suspension on your motorcycle. Thanks for tuning in to this tip of the week here at Cruiser Customizing. Until next week, take care and ride safe.